Hello, and welcome to part two of 7 things you need to know about German church records. In part one, we covered tips 1 through 4, and in part two, we'll finish off with tips 5 through 7. Let's get started. Tip number 5, spelling was not standardized in German church records. So, spelling really didn't undergo a major standardization process that stuck until the late 19th century in Germany. So that means when you're working with your church records, you may see your last name spelled a number of different ways and German words spelled a number of different ways as well. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, how am I supposed to recognize all those different ways if there's so many? That's a good question, but the answer I always tell people is to think like a German. And by that, I mean there were certain letter pairs that German speakers did and still do tend to mix up with one another. So these pairs are the pairs you want to look out for. So if everyone could say a b at home right now, b b, and now say a p. Did you notice and can you see that those sounds were made at the same part of the mouth as one another? B and p, both made at the same part of the mouth. And that is how all of these letter pairs are related to one another. They are each made at the same part of the mouth as their counterpart. The difference is one of those sounds uses vocal cord vibration. Our vocal cords vibrate when making it, whereas its counterpart does not. Now, in English, we don't really have a hard time telling the difference between a B and a P or a D and a T. But in German, even today, speakers confuse these sounds. So that meant that in the past, before spelling was standardized, these sounds would get confused with one another all the time. So if your last name has a B in it, try looking for it with a P as well. If your last name has a T in it, look for it with a D, and so on. And this will significantly help you to find your last name in church records. So, one great tool related to last names is the website GeoGen. And I always like to let people know about this website because it's so helpful. So, if you're looking at a handwritten last name in your church record and you want to make sure that that last name has been transcribed correctly, you can go to this website GeoGen, type in your last name. So, I was working with the last name of Volken. Type it in here and it will actually show you the instances of that last name in Germany. And how this can help us is if my document comes from this area and I see that all of these instances of Vulcan exist in this area of Germany, I can be pretty certain that my transcription guess is correct. However, if my document comes from down here and there's no instances of the last name down there, I might want to look back at that handwritten word and see if I transcribed something incorrectly. You can also click on the map, make it go like this to see a kind of a different view of the graph. And you can also click on this little graph over here and then press Show Cities Overlay and it will show you the cities in Germany plus the density of that last name in relation to those cities. So this is just a great tool. It's very helpful when you're trying to figure out last names on a document and if they really do exist in Germany. All right, tip number 6, one of my favorites, the word des. Des is a very important word on German church records, and it means of the. This is what the word will look like in the German handwriting. So feel free to take a screenshot of the screen because it's very important that you remember this word des. So it's a possessive word and it means of or of the. And you'll see it in places like Sohn des, son of, Tochter des, daughter of, Frau des, wife of, Witwe des, widow of. So you can imagine why this is important. because after that of or that of the, it's going to tell us here, son of the parents' names, or here, wife of the husband's name, or here, widow of the deceased spouse's name. So that word des is a great clue word to find more information about the person's relationships right after it. Such a good word. So for example, in this record, can you find the word des? It's in the first line towards the end. There it is. If you got it, good job. So that word des, try to remember it. It's so important. The word before it is Tochter. If you remember, that means daughter. So Tochter. And don't worry about the German handwriting. You have your key, but I just wanted to show you for those of you who are interested what that word is. So we have daughter of, and afterward is going to come the father's name. His name is Jakob Hutzinger. So finding that des allowed us to extract the father's name from the church record. So look for the des, look after it, and you will get the relationship's names. Now, I do want to let you know it might not always be right after it. Sometimes the occupation will come in between. So you might get daughter of the farmer and then the name. So it depends on the record. Sometimes you'll get daughter of the name, farmer, or sometimes you'll get daughter of the farmer name. But either way, the name will be very shortly after the des. So find your des, look after it, you'll get the name. And if the name's not exactly after it, the occupation will be in between and the name will be right after that. All right, the last tip, you've made it through. Suffixes do not always change the last name. That IN ending, has anyone ever seen an IN ending on your last name? If you have, it usually means that that is a female with your last name. So for example, if my name was in a record, it might be written as Katarina Schober in. That all that means is that my last name is Schober, and that in just signifies that I'm a female with the last name of Schober. So when I'm translating these documents into English, I would just delete that IN. It doesn't mean anything besides the fact that I'm a female. It doesn't change the name. It doesn't mean that your last name is written one way here and another way there. It's just a grammatical marker saying that that person is a female. So here is a record. We have a last name, and we have an IN on the end. So that last name is Probst in. So all that IN means is that this person, Carolina, is a female with the last name of Probst. Now, some people always ask me, well, what if my last name really does end in IN? How do I tell the difference? Great question. The way to differentiate between those is to look for a male in your record. Does he have an IN on his last name? If he does, that IN actually belongs to the last name. But if his last name just says Probst, and then the female in the record says Probst in, then you know that that IN is just a grammatical marker. And usually that's what it is. So look for those INs, usually means a female. All right, the S ending. This relates to our favorite word, des. So once you have the phrase son des, son of, something that that phrase requires is that an S goes onto the end of a word that follows the des. Don't get confused, it's German grammar, it's a little confusing, but I'll show you exactly what I mean. For example, whenever you have a des, an S will need to either attach to the last name that follows the des, so maybe that father's last name, or to that father's occupation after the des. So here we have Sohn des Johann Schmitz, son of Johann Schmitz. But look, this word Schmitz ends in an S. That's the end S right here. So that S has nothing to do with the last name. It's just a grammatical marker, just like our IN before, that it comes because of the des. So des requires that an S either gets attached to the last name, like here, or to the occupation. Remember how I mentioned before that you'll either get the occupation here, right before the name, or here, right after the name. So the S will either go on one of these. Let's look at another example. Here we have Sohn des Webers Johann Schmidt, son of the weaver Johann Schmidt. Look where the S is here. It's on the occupation. So like I said, that S, which is required by the des, anytime you have a des, you're going to get an S after it. And it's either going to be on the last name, on your ancestor's last name, like here, Schmitz, which doesn't change the last name. When you're translating into English, just take off that S, just like that IN. It's just a grammatical marker, or it's going to be on the occupation. So look for that S and then just delete it away. You don't need it, but it's good to know what it means. If you want more help with church records, I actually published a book last year called The Magic of German Church Records, and it teaches you all the tips that you need, like looking for names after deaths and things like that. So if that would be helpful for you as you continue, it will be on the handout. And now I always like to finish up my classes with a test so we can see how much you've learned. So hopefully you watched both parts 1 and 2 because this is a little review of both parts. So number 1, what does IN mean at the end of a name? If you guessed female, you are right. Remember, just take that IN off. All it means is that your ancestor was a female with that last name. What is the letter B's letter pair? What letter does the letter B often get confused with in German? If you guessed P, you are correct. Which website can you use to play hangman or help you fill in the blank for those German words where you can only decipher some of the letters? Wordmind.info, and that one is on your handout. Which word means of or of the and signifies that a relative's name will follow? Our favorite German word in church records. That is our des. Remember, look for that des and you'll find a name shortly after. Which letter will be added to a name or occupation following the word des? The letter S. So remember, if you see an S on your last name, that's usually just a grammatical marker followed by the word des, or it will be on the occupation if it's not there. And then finally, this comes from part 1. What is the number 1 tip for deciphering church records? What do I always tell my clients to do if they only send me their ancestors' individual record? That is to use the entire page. Remember to use the other records on the page if you can't decipher a word on your own record. Remember, the formatting is the same, more or less, so you'll be able to use other people's record to help you decipher your own. So that's it. I hope these 7 tips will help you with your own ancestors' church records. If you have any questions at all, feel free to contact me. My contact information is on the handout, or you can go to my website. I hope you learned a lot. I know that you'll be able to work with your church records. And if you have any questions as you do, as I said, just let me know. Thanks so much for watching.